如果说地缘政治影响了各国在政治经贸上所做的决定，那焦虑便是此刻全球政治人物染上的共同疾病。近期，《纽约时报》刊登了一篇普林斯顿大学学者罗里特鲁克斯发表的一篇标题为 Let's all take a deep breath about China 的文章，提到了美国对中国的焦虑。然而，暂不论到底是一个弱中国还是一个强中国对世界的威胁较小，单从美国对中国焦虑来看，已经搅动全球紊乱。
President Biden trying to boost American jobs and perhaps his poll numbers. The president hitting $18 billion worth of imports from China with new tariffs. Under the plan, tariffs on Chinese electric cars coming into the U.S. will quadruple from 25% to 100%. Also targeted batteries, medical equipment, steel, aluminum, semiconductors, and solar cells. The administration says the tariffs will level the playing field, protecting what it describes as a comeback in American manufacturing from cheaper Chinese goods.
We're not going to let China flood our market, making it impossible for American auto manufacturers to compete fairly. I'm determined that the future of electric vehicles will be made in America by union workers, period.
This is a really big moment for the global economy because Joe Biden has imposed these tariffs. Let me just kind of show you what we're talking about with tariffs. Of course, that's the amount that you have to pay to get goods into a given country. And in the US, up until recently, actually, there was a standard car tariff, the most favored nation tariff as it's known, 2.5%. So it wasn't much for China. It wasn't much for other places that are trying to send cars to the US. Then, of course, Donald Trump came in and he raised it. He raised it by 25%. A lot of people thought Joe Biden wouldn't continue that, but now he has actually gone further. He's doubled down. Actually, he's kind of quadrupled down on Donald Trump. A new 100% tariff. That's on top of the 2.5%. So actually, it's 102.5% tariffs. Enormous tariffs. And why is the US doing this? Well, partly it's because they're really worried about competition. They're worried about competition from China. And this chart really kind of shows you that story. It shows you global exports of cars from all of these countries. So the biggies, like the US, like Germany, like Japan. And look at China, okay? So the red line here, it was really low for years and years and years, up until recently when it has overtaken everyone else. And why has it done that? It's because of electric cars. China's so dominant when it comes to electric cars. But here's the thing, they're not dominant when it comes to electric car imports into the US. This is showing you where the US is getting its electric cars from right now. And look at China, red bit over there. It's really small, actually, if I kind of just pull that across there. You see it's one of the smallest importers into the US. But of course, you've got the EU there, you've got South Korea. A big question is how many Chinese components are going into Mexican cars that then go over the border. We don't really know what's going to happen with that. What we do know is a lot of the components inside of electric cars, because it's not just about the car, it's about what goes inside it, they also come from China. So you've got the battery, the cell, as people call it. This is showing you global dominance of China. The red bits there is Chinese dominance. That dark bit there, that's the US. You can see how dominant China is when it comes to the cells, but also the chemicals inside the cells. The cathodes, China massively dominant there. The anodes, the graphite that you need inside these batteries as well. And we could extend this and look at other things as well, like hydrogen. You could look at concrete, you could look at steel. China incredibly dominant. And all of the point here is the US is trying to increase its share, but it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult too, not just for batteries, but also for solar as well, because look at how China is way ahead of the rest on that as well. So it's only the beginning of a very big saga here. And of course, the next question is, what about the EU and what about the UK?
而美国对中国的焦虑正在感染其他国家。
We've been very clear that the situation now is that China is behaving in an increasingly assertive way abroad, authoritarian at home, and it represents an epoch-defining challenge and also the greatest state-based threat to our economic security. So it's right that we take measures to protect ourselves, which is what we are doing. To give some specific examples, we've used our new national security investment powers to block investment from China into sensitive technology sectors like semiconductors. Our National Security Act and others means that we can take any other steps that we need to. We've removed Huawei, for example, from our telecoms network, and we will always do what is required to keep our country safe.
当美中贸易争端由小院高墙走向大院围墙之后，是否有助于全球的经济复苏，或是能为保护主义带来更多利多的消息呢？
Janice, electric vehicle models from Chinese automaker BYD, just as one example, they sell for as low as $10,000. I mean, you can barely get a used car for that kind of money in the U.S., never mind a new electric vehicle. So how do U.S. automakers keep up?
Well, that's the golden question. And I mean, on BYD's cars and other cars from Chinese electric vehicle makers, I've test driven a few of them, and the quality and design have been seen as really improving over the past decade. In addition to that, the charging network is in place here. So the infrastructure piece is in place for Chinese electric vehicles to thrive in the Chinese market. That said, demand is beginning to sag here, and Chinese EV makers are still making millions of vehicles. This is where the U.S. concern on overcapacity comes in, that there are a lot of Chinese vehicles that now are not being sold here, and they're being shipped elsewhere in the world. They're going to countries in Europe, South America, and Latin America. So this is the concern for the Biden administration on overcapacity. Companies like BYD are also setting up factories in Mexico. So that's raising concerns as well. Just one last quick point. I spoke recently with the former CEO of Ford, and he was saying that trade barriers and tariffs are going to be important to protect the U.S. market, to give automakers in America the time to catch up.
There's some benefit to what the Americans have done here. Is if they're going to hold out our major competition, Canadian exports into the U.S. market are going to be much more favorable.
The Prime Minister is trying to position Canada as an ally, ready to fill any manufacturing gaps, as he unveiled another new EV supply chain plant.
根据美国海关和边境保护局的表示，截至目前为止，美国人已为川普对进口太阳能板、钢铁和铝以及中国制造的商品征收的关税支付了超过2300亿美元，一半以上的关税是在拜登执政期间征收的。BBC 为此做了一则专题报道，里面提到，美国加征关税对中国的影响不如表面看上去那样有杀伤力。以太阳能电池板为例，他们引述美国智库战略与国际研究中心的说法，目前超过80%的太阳能电池板在中国进行生产，而在中国生产一块电池板的成本要比美国便宜60%。至于对电动车来说，新关税可能不会对中国企业产生什么直接影响，因为中国生产的电动车大多被汽车关税拒之于美国市场之外。
Until recently, the idea that electric vehicles would make up a significant portion of all cars on our streets was something for the future. Then China came along and thrust the future upon us now. It's achieved this with breakneck growth in the industry, fueled by government subsidies. The problem with this is that the Europeans and Americans are saying that that's given Chinese brands an unfair advantage on price, that they've been able to flood markets in other countries at rates that local brands can't compete with. And they're threatening to put tariffs on Chinese cars to level the playing field. The counter-argument to that, though, is that at the beginning, you needed to have such subsidies, to have enough charging stations, to give electric vehicles a significant enough portion of the market to survive into the future. And the biggest change that's happened has been in terms of the attitudes of ordinary people. You just have to speak to the would-be customers at this huge auto show to see that.
From voice-triggered instructions to the latest flashy on-screen displays, China's electric vehicle industry is showing off what it can do. For example, these charging stations boast 500 kilometres or 310 miles of driving after just 12 minutes plugged in. And the established European and American brands are also taking on this country's many new players here.
Chinese companies have invested heavily in the development of electric vehicles, building huge factories and the like, and they are going to need export revenue to make their money back. Many won't survive because the competition is just so fierce. And yet the upside is they can always fall back on the massive domestic market, and it looks like it'll just keep growing as more and more people make the switch away from traditional vehicles.
一位澳洲的政治风险分析师 Henry Story 近期发表一篇文章，里面提到，澳洲制造业一直处于长期衰退之中。随着澳洲工厂关闭，对亚洲的资源出口呈现指数级的增长。Henry Story 提到，澳洲具有成本竞争力的资源， 是有助于建立世界一流的基础设施，可以支撑中国的出口机器及其在电池制造等领域的领先地位。然而，如果选择跟中国最擅长的领域去竞争，绝对不是一件容易事。因为 Henry Story 认为，很少有国家能够在成为世界领先的资源出口国的同时，去发展或维持重要的工业基础。而法国也与中国保持着不远不近的距离。The Nationalist 近期就有一篇标题为 Make France's Engagement with China 的报道，当中提到近期国际2场重要的会议，一场是在卡达举办的经济论坛，一场是6月由马来西亚战略与国际研究所主办的亚太圆桌会议。这2场会议主题的焦点都在讨论世界即将面对的变动，也就是如何面对从单极世界跨入多极世界。
The theme of this year's 3-day event is a world remade, navigating the year of uncertainty. We'll be exploring the issues driving global boardroom conversations and spotlight the Gulf's rising importance. That's as key states strategically deploy wealth to enhance their global influence, diversify economies, and gain international prominence.
Your Excellency, what would you say is the biggest risk on your radar as you think of the outlook in the next couple of years? It doesn't have to be AI. It could be anything that's on your radar. What is keeping you up at night?
Honestly, political instability. We need to see political stability in the regions, in different regions, to see more growth in the economies. We are, as an economist and policymakers in the financial sector, we want to see stability in the regions for the economy to grow.
Ken, moments ago you mentioned China and EVs. As it happens today, the Biden administration is levying sweeping new tariffs on Chinese imports, including on electric vehicles. How does that change the picture?
Well, it's sort of a continuation of the incoherent economic policies of the Biden administration. We've seen this giant push towards green energy over the course of the last several years, and at the same time, a set of policies that run completely contrary to the stated goal of trying to head towards a zero-carbon world, and placing enormous tariffs on Chinese EVs, which are low-cost, high-quality, of great value to American consumers, is yet another part of the incoherent Biden economic strategy. The other part of the strategy that I scratched my head about is the U.S. refusing to provide new LNG permits. Right? If you want the world to head towards a lower carbon footprint and move away from coal, access to LNG is a really important part of the equation. And yet the United States is refusing to permit new facilities in the foreseeable future.
And also to sell LNG to countries with which the United States doesn't have a free trade agreement.
That's a part of the equation also.
That said, the United States, amazingly, is a bigger LNG exporter than Qatar.
We're neck and neck. We're neck and neck. And it's very important to understand that if you want a country to base its economy on natural gas, they're going to want two suppliers. It's not a win-lose dynamic between the United States and Qatar. It's a win-win. If you look at any good that is required on an existential basis, you're going to want dual source supply, and the rise of the United States as a major LNG exporter only strengthens the position.
我们正进入世界被重塑的不定期吗？那对地缘政治的风险与政策的不确定性产生焦虑是正常的。可是如果因噎废食，蹉跎了进步的脚步，那造成的损失将花更多的时间去追赶。